When Emily pushed up her sleeve to wipe down the window, Richard saw the tattoo on her wrist and his world stopped. A rose with thorns, bleeding. He had given her that mark 203 years ago, but how could he possibly know that? How could he be sure of something so impossible? The answer was etched into that woman's skin, and it was about to change everything. This is the story of a promise that spanned 2 centuries, of a love that death couldn't extinguish, and of a mark she was born with, because in another life, he himself had tattooed it onto her. And you need to understand from the beginning, because what happened in that brownstone on that Thursday afternoon defies everything you believe about destiny, time, and love. Richard Thornton was 38 years old, and he was an empire. 23 commercial buildings, 12 luxury condominiums, a fortune estimated at $470 million. His brownstone in Brooklyn Heights took up an entire block. 15 rooms, an Olympic-sized heated pool, a helipad on the roof. But there was something his money could never buy: peace. Since childhood, Richard had suffered nightmares, always the same ones. He was in some ancient place, wearing clothes he didn't recognize and holding needles and ink, and a woman was weeping as he marked her skin. A rose, 7 thorns, blood mixed with tears. And every time he woke up, he felt the same ache in his chest, as if he had lost something precious, as if he had been searching for someone for a very long time. His therapists called it existential anxiety. They prescribed medications, nothing worked. Until that Thursday. Emily Reyes was 29 years old, and she worked 3 jobs. From Monday to Friday, she cleaned brownstones in Brooklyn Heights. On Saturdays, heavy cleaning in office buildings. On Sundays, she prepared meal preps to sell at the farmer's market. She lived with her 3-year-old daughter, Lilyhood, in a small room behind her grandmother Eleanor's house and in Queens. She took 3 buses to get to Brooklyn Heights. She left home at 5 in the morning. She returned at 9 at night. And in all that time and in all that struggle, there was one thing Emily could never explain. The tattoo on her left wrist, a red rose, 7 thorns, always bleeding. It wasn't an ordinary tattoo. Emily was born with that mark. The doctors called it a complex vascular hemangioma, a rare skin malformation. But her grandmother Eleanor always said something else. You were born marked, honey. Marked by a love that killed you in another life. Emily never believed it, but she also never forgot it, and she always hid the mark. Thick bracelets and long sleeves, even in the heat, because people stared. They asked questions, they judged, until that Thursday, when her bracelet broke. It was Emily's first week working at the Thornton brownstone. The agency had sent her resume. She had gone through 3 interviews with the house manager. She never saw the owner. Richard was rarely home during the day. Meetings, travel, business. The brownstone was an empty museum most of the time, but on that Thursday, he cancelled everything. Severe headache. The nightmares had returned, more intense than ever. 3 nights without proper sleep. He was in his office on the 2nd floor when he heard the sound, someone cleaning the windows in the hallway. And then he saw her. Emily was facing away from him, scrubbing the glass in circular motions. Simple navy blue uniform, a white apron tied at her waist, brown hair pulled back in a bun, worn sneakers. She stretched to reach the upper corner of the window. The sleeve of her uniform slid up, and Richard saw the tattoo. Everything stopped. Time, breath, heart. Everything froze in that impossible second. The rose, the 7 thorns, the vivid red, almost bleeding. Richard felt a wave of heat rise from his stomach to his throat. His hands began to tremble, his vision blurred. And then came the flash. He's in a place that smells of herbs and candles. His hands hold thin needles, red ink in a clay bowl. And the woman in front of him cries softly as he marks her skin. This rose will bleed until we meet again. The flash lasted 3 seconds, but it was enough for Richard to stagger and grab the wall. When his vision returned, Emily had turned around. She saw him, startled. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know you were home. I can come back later." Her voice. Richard felt another shock. He knew that voice, Not from this life, from somewhere deeper, older. He tried to speak. His mouth was dry. "Your wrist," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. "The mark on your wrist." Emily quickly pulled her sleeve down, covering the tattoo. Her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, sir. My bracelet broke today. I usually cover it. It won't happen again." She began to gather her cleaning supplies, nervous, wanting to get out of there. But Richard took 3 steps forward. "Wait." Something in his voice made Emily stop. She didn't dare look up. "Please," Richard said, and his voice sounded strange even to himself. "Show me." "It's nothing, sir. Just a birthmark. I'll cover it better, I promise." "Please." There was desperation in that word, an urgency that Emily didn't understand, but that made her heart race. Slowly, without knowing why she was obeying, she raised her sleeve and extended her left wrist. The rose was there, red, vivid, perfect. 7 thorns curved outward, the red so intense that it seemed wet. Richard reached out his hand. His fingers trembled. "May I?" he asked. Emily nodded, not understanding why. And when Richard's fingers touched her skin, when his fingertips brushed against the tattooed rose, they both felt it. An electric shock ran through them both at the same time. Emily gasped. Richard closed his eyes, and they both saw. Flash. 1820. He in simple linen clothes, his hands stained with ink. She in a green embroidered dress. Tears streaming down her face. A promise being made. Their stolen kiss. Death arriving. The flash lasted 5 seconds. When they opened their eyes, they were staring at each other. Richard was still holding her wrist. Emily was trembling. "What was that?" she whispered. Richard released her hand as if he had been burned. He took 2 steps back, his heart beating so fast that he thought he was going to faint. "Have you always had that mark?" he asked. "I was born with it." "Born?" "Yes, sir. The doctors say it's a vascular hemangioma, a rare malformation. But my grandmother always said that." Emily stopped, realizing she was about to say something ridiculous. "What?" Richard insisted. "What did your grandmother say?" Emily swallowed hard. "That I was born marked by a love from another life." The silence that fell between them was dense, heavy, impossible. Richard looked at her, really looked at her. Emily wasn't beautiful by the standards he knew. Tired face, hands rough from so much work, simple clothes. But there was something in her eyes, something familiar, ancient. As if he'd looked into those eyes 1,000 times, as if he'd cried in those arms, as if he'd died in her arms. "What's your full name?" he asked. "Emily Reyes, sir." "Emily," he repeated. "Emily." And then he murmured something so low she almost didn't hear it. "It used to be Mary." Emily froze. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Richard blinked, snapping back to the present. "Nothing. I'm sorry. I have a headache. Please continue your work." He turned quickly and walked out of the hallway, leaving Emily alone, confused and a little frightened, and with her wrist still tingling where he had touched it. If you've ever felt like you know someone you've just met, you'll understand what happened next. If you've never felt that, it might be hard to believe. But keep listening, because what's coming defies all logic. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes, images that didn't make sense. Her in an old place, wearing clothes she'd never seen. A man touching her with such tenderness, needles piercing her skin, pain mixed with love, and his voice saying, "This rose will bleed until we meet again." She woke up at 3 in the morning with her wrist burning. The tattoo was redder than ever, almost glowing in the dark. Emily went to the small room where her grandmother slept. "Grandma?" she called softly. The old Eleanor opened her eyes immediately. She was 85 years old but sharp as a tack. "What is it, honey?" Emily showed her wrist. "It's burning. And I had strange dreams. Eleanor turned on the light. She looked at the mark. And then she looked into her granddaughter's eyes with an expression Emily had never seen before. Fear and hope. You found him, Eleanor whispered. Found who? The man who marked you. Grandma. Please don't start with that again. But Eleanor held her hands with surprising strength. Listen, Emily, listen closely. When you were born, that mark was already there. The doctors said it was impossible, that hemangiomas don't come in that perfect shape. But I knew the truth, because my mother told me, and her mother told her. Emily sat on the edge of the bed. Told you what? That women in our family are born marked, not all of them, but some. Always the same mark, always in the same place, and when it happens, it's because that woman died for love in another life, and the mark is the promise that that love will find her again. That's crazy, Grandma. Maybe. But today you felt something, didn't you? When someone touched the mark. Emily turned pale. How did her grandmother know? I felt it, she admitted quietly. When my boss touched my wrist, I felt like I already knew him, like you've waited for him your whole life. Yes, Eleanor nodded slowly. Then it's begun. And you need to be careful, honey, because what's going to happen now isn't ordinary fate. It's a promise between two souls, and promises like that come at a price. 3 days passed. Richard cancelled all his trips. He stayed in the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. He worked in the office, but his attention was elsewhere. He listened to her footsteps, the sound of the broom, the water running, and every time he knew Emily was near, his heart raced. He tried to convince himself he was going crazy. Stress, too much work, imagination. But the dreams wouldn't stop. Now they were more vivid, more real. He saw everything. 1820, colonial Mexico. He was Diego, an orphan who had learned the art of tattooing from an old apothecary. He worked in a small dark room in the back of a hacienda, and she was Maria Dolores, the hacienda owner's daughter. Rich, educated, promised to a Spanish count she had never seen. They met by accident. She had gotten lost in the back of the property. She entered his small room looking for help, and when their eyes met, they both felt it. Recognition. The secret meetings began. She would sneak down. He would wait for her. They would talk for hours. They shared dreams they could never realize. She wanted freedom. He wanted love. And then came the day she was to be forced into marriage. Do something that will remind me of you forever, Maria asked, crying, so that even when I'm forced to belong to another, a part of me will be yours. And Diego took the needles. He mixed the reddest ink he knew, and he tattooed on her wrist a rose with 7 thorns. 1 thorn for each month we've had, he said, and the rose that never fades, like our love. This rose will bleed until we meet again, Maria swore. I promise, Diego replied. I will find you, in this life, or the next. But they were discovered. The next day, Diego was captured, accused of seducing the hacienda owner's daughter, of defiling a promised woman. He was executed in the main square, 23 years old. Maria tried to intervene. She begged. She threatened to renounce everything, but her father locked her up. And 3 months later, she died. The doctors said it was fever, but the truth is, it was heartbreak. Her heart simply gave up. And when her body was prepared for burial, they discovered something strange. The tattoo on her wrist was bleeding. It wasn't ink. It was real blood. The church called it a devil's mark. They tried to erase it, to burn it. Nothing worked. In the end, they buried her with white gloves to hide the mark. But the promise remained. Richard woke up from that dream screaming. It was Saturday, 4 in the morning. He was soaked in sweat, his pillow wet with tears. And he knew, with every fiber of his being, that wasn't a dream. It was memory. He had been Diego, and Emily had been Maria, and 203 years later, the promise had brought them back. But how do you prove something so impossible? How do you explain this to someone without sounding crazy? Richard needed answers. He needed proof. And that's when he remembered. The brownstone in Brooklyn Heights where he lived had been built in 1920. But the land was old, very old. There were historical documents in the City Hall archive mentioning a hacienda that existed there before. On Monday morning, Richard went to the historical archives of New York City in person. "I need records about the land in Brooklyn Heights, Block 14, he said to the archivist. "Anything from before 1900. The woman consulted the systems. She returned with 3 dusty boxes. "There are records of a hacienda called San Jeronimo," she said. "It existed from 1650 to 1890. Then it was abandoned. The land was sold in 1920. Richard opened the first box with trembling hands. And there, in the third document, he found it. Death record. 1820. Diego Ramirez, 23 years old. Occupation, tattoo artist. Cause of death, public execution for seduction of a promised woman. Richard could barely breathe. He turned the page, and there was another record. Maria Dolores de San Jeronimo, 21 years old, passed away 3 months later. Cause of death, sudden fever. Special note, buried with gloves to cover a devil's mark on her left wrist. A devil's mark. Richard asked to see the attached documents. The archivist brought him a sealed folder. Inside were forensic drawings from that era, medical illustrations of Maria's body, and there, on the third page, was a detailed drawing of the mark on her wrist. A rose, 7 thorns, exactly the same. Richard staggered out of the historical archive. He sat on a bench in the park outside. He put his head in his hands. It was true. All of it was true. But the question echoing in his mind was, what now? What to do with this impossible truth? Meanwhile, back at the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, Emily was cleaning the second-floor library. She had strict orders from Eleanor, the housekeeper, to organize the old books, to dust the high shelves. It was an all-day job. The library had 3 walls covered in mahogany bookshelves. Thousands of books, some hundreds of years old. Emily was at the top of the ladder, dusting the highest shelf when her hand bumped into something hidden behind the books, a metal box. She pulled it out. It was heavy, ancient, locked with a rusty padlock. Emily climbed down the ladder with the box. It probably belonged to the previous owner of the brownstone. She should give it to Eleanor. But something made her hesitate. She shook the box. There was something inside. Papers. Light objects. Without knowing why, Emily looked for something to open the padlock. She found a letter opener on the desk. She forced it. The old padlock gave way. She opened the box, and her world shattered. Inside was a diary. Worn leather cover. Yellowed pages. And on the first page, written in old handwriting, Diary of Maria Dolores de San Jeronimo, year of 1820. Emily sat on the floor. She opened the diary with trembling hands and began to read. March 15th, 1820. Today I met a man who made my heart stop. He is not noble. He is not rich. But when our eyes met, I felt as if I had known him for 1,000 years. Emily turned the page. April 3rd. Diego showed me his art. He marks people's skin with ink and needles. He says each mark tells a story. And I want him to tell mine. Another page. June 20th. I asked Diego to mark me. Something that no one can take away. Something to prove that this love is real. He hesitated. He said it was dangerous, but I insisted, and he did. A rose with 7 thorns, 1 for each month of our secret love. And the last entry. September 10th. They took him. They will execute him tomorrow. And I can't save him, and I can't do anything. I can only make a promise. This mark he made will bleed until we meet again, in this life or the next. I swear it." Emily was crying, tears falling on the old pages, and then she turned to the last page of the diary, and there was a drawing, someone's hand, a wrist, and on it, drawn in red ink, a rose with 7 thorns, exactly like hers. Emily dropped the diary. She rolled up her sleeve, looked at her own mark, and then she understood. That wasn't just a birthmark, it was a promise, made 203 years ago, by a woman who died of love, and who had been born again, in her. If you haven't felt goosebumps yet, then I need to tell you what happened when Richard came home that afternoon. Because there, in that library, 2 centuries of separation were about to end, and the promise engraved on Emily's skin would finally be fulfilled. Richard entered the brownstone at 3 in the afternoon. He carried a folder with copies of the historical documents, the proofs, evidence of something that shouldn't exist, but at the same time he hesitated. What to do with it? Show it to Emily? A housekeeper he barely knew? Say what exactly? That they had lived before? That he had been executed for loving her? That she died of heartbreak? She would think he was crazy, or worse. She would be afraid of him. And that possibility hurt more than Richard could comprehend. He went straight to the office. But as he passed through the second-floor hallway, he heard a sound coming from the library. Someone crying. Richard pushed the door open slowly and saw her. Emily was sitting on the floor, her back to the door, shoulders shaking. An open metal box next to her, and in her hands an old book. "Emily?" Richard called softly. She turned around abruptly, startled. Her face was wet with tears, her eyes red. And when she looked at him, there was something different in that look. She was no longer the shy housekeeper. It was something else, recognition, pain, and something that looked like anger. "Did you know?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Did you know who I was?" Richard took a step into the library. I started to find out. The dreams, the visions. I didn't understand at first." Emily got up from the floor. She held the diary against her chest. "This was hidden here, in your brownstone. Maria Dolores's diary from 1820. She describes everything, the forbidden love and the tattoo, the promise. And then she raised her wrist, showing the mark. And this that I've always had, that I never understood. It was hers. It was mine. From another life." Her voice rose, almost a scream. All the fear, all the confusion of the last few days exploding. How is this possible? How can someone be born with a 200-year-old tattoo? How can I remember things I never lived? Richard approached slowly. "I went to the historical archive today," he said calmly. "I found records of Diego Ramirez, a tattoo artist executed in 1820, and of Maria Dolores, who died 3 months later, with a devil's mark on her wrist." He placed the folder on the table, opened it, took out the copies. "Here's the death certificate, and here, the forensic drawing of the mark." Emily took the papers with trembling hands. She looked at the drawing of the rose, at the medical description, and then she looked at her own wrist. It was identical, down to the last detail. She let the papers fall. "This is insane. This can't be real." But Richard took another step. Now he was only a meter away from her. "You felt it, Emily. When I touched your hand, you saw it, just like I saw it." Emily shook her head, trying to deny it. "It was just, I don't know, imagination. Plus stress." "Then why are you crying? Why did you find this diary today of all days, just when we were starting to remember?" "Because destiny is cruel," Emily replied, her voice bitter. "Because in 1820 you were a poor orphan, and I was the hacendado's daughter. And now 203 years later, you're a millionaire and I clean your house." She laughed, but there was no joy in that sound, just pain. "The roles have been reversed, but the result is the same. We can't be together." "Who said that?" "Reality, Sir Thornton. I clean your floors. I take 3 buses to get here. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I make 12,000 pesos a month. You live in a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, and you have a helicopter. And what does that matter?" "It matters everything," Emily shouted. "It mattered in 1820, and it matters now. We can't." But her voice failed, and the tears returned. Richard didn't think. He didn't calculate. He just acted. He closed the gap between them and pulled Emily into an embrace. She stiffened for a second and then broke. She buried her face in his chest and wept. Wept for the 203 years of separation, for the life they'd lost, for the promise that had burned on her skin since birth. And Richard held her as he had held her before in a previous life, in the last minutes before he was taken away to die. "I've looked for you," he whispered into her hair, "in every life, and I knew you were somewhere and I could feel it." Emily lifted her face. Her brown eyes were soaked, vulnerable. "What do we do now?" And that was the question, wasn't it? What do you do when 2 souls reunite after 2 centuries, when the promise is fulfilled, but the circumstances remain impossible? Richard had no answer, so he did the only thing that made sense. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was soft at first, hesitant, but when Emily responded, when her arms rose and wrapped around his neck, something changed. The kiss deepened, became urgent, desperate, as if they were trying to reclaim 203 lost years in that moment. And then, they both felt it. Emily's pulse burned. The tattoo ached like fire. They broke apart, breathless. Emily looked down. The rose was redder than ever, almost glowing. "It's bleeding," she whispered, frightened. It wasn't real blood, but the red pulsed, as if the mark was alive. "The promise," Richard said, still breathing raggedly. "It responded to the kiss." "Yes." Emily touched the mark with trembling fingers. "In 1820, Maria promised that the rose would bleed until you found each other again," she said slowly. "And now, we have found each other. Then maybe it'll stop bleeding," Richard completed. But as they watched, the mark continued pulsing, red, alive, hot. "Or maybe," Emily whispered, "it'll keep bleeding until we finish what we started." "What do you mean?" "In 1820, that we promised to be together, but we were separated before we could fulfill it. Diego died. Maria died. The promise remained incomplete." Richard understood. "So the mark will only stop when we fulfill the promise completely." "But Emily, I'm your boss. You're my employee. People will talk or judge, just like they did in 1820. "Yes." Emily took a deep breath. And then she did something surprising. She took off her apron and placed it on the table along with her uniform cap. "Then I'm not your employee anymore. Wait, what are you doing? Choosing?" In 1820, Maria didn't have a choice. Her father decided. Society decided. Diego was executed before they could escape. Emily looked directly into his eyes. "But now, in this life, I decide. And I choose not to let fear or social difference separate us again." Richard felt his chest tighten. "Are you sure? You have a daughter, a life. I can't ask you to risk everything for a promise from 203 years ago. For a mark you were born with? For a love that's crossed death?" Emily touched his face. "You're not asking. I'm offering." "And what would you have done? If you discovered that there was someone in the world your soul recognized, someone you loved so deeply that death didn't erase it, someone who promised to find you in every life, would you run or risk everything?" Think carefully before you answer, because what happened next tested that promise in ways neither of them expected. Richard and Emily spent the next few hours in that library, reading the diary together, comparing it to historical records, piecing together the complete story of Diego and Maria, and the more they discovered, the more real it became. Diego was 23 when he was executed. An orphan. Since he was 12, he learned to tattoo from an apothecary named Sebastian. He was talented. People came from afar to be marked by him. Maria was 21, the only daughter of landowner Don Rodrigo de San Jeronimo. Educated by French tutors, she played the piano, read in 3 languages. But she was her father's property, betrothed to a 50-year-old count who lived in Spain. They met in March of 1820. Maria had gone down to the stables looking for a horse that had escaped. She ended up at the back of the hacienda where Diego worked. Love at first sight wasn't an exaggeration. They both described the same thing in the records: recognition, as if they had already known each other before. The secret meetings lasted 6 months, always at night, always hidden. And when the arranged marriage was set for September, Maria asked Diego to mark her, something that no one could take away, not her husband, not time. Diego tattooed the rose on June 18th, 1820. He used ink he made himself, red pigment from cochineal mixed with oil, 7 thorns, 1 for each month of secret love. But 2 days later, they were discovered. A servant saw them and told Don Rodrigo. Diego was arrested immediately. Summary trial, sentenced to death. Maria tried everything, begged, offered to renounce her inheritance, threatened to kill herself. Nothing worked. Diego was hanged in the Central Plaza of San Angel on June 20th, 1820. 2 days after making the tattoo, Maria was locked in her rooms, guards at the door, windows sealed. She stopped eating, stopped drinking. In 2 weeks, she was feverish. In 6, delirious. The last diary entry was from September 10th. Today is my wedding day, but I'm not going, because today I'm going to join Diego. I promised that this mark would bleed until we found each other again, and I keep my promises, even if it takes 100 lifetimes. Maria Dolores de San Jeronimo died on September 12th, 1820, 3 months and 2 days after Diego. She was 21 years old, and when they prepared the body, the tattoo on her wrist was bleeding. Real blood, not ink. The doctors couldn't explain it. The church called it possession. Don Rodrigo ordered her buried quickly and with gloves before anyone saw, but the story spread, became a local legend, the girl who died of love and was marked by the devil. And 203 years later, that mark had been born on Emily. Richard closed the last document, looked at Emily. "Do you believe now?" Emily touched her wrist. The mark was still pulsing. "I don't know what to believe, but I know what I feel. And I know that this mark, it's been burning me since I met you, as if it were waiting, recognizing." Richard took her hand. He traced his thumb over the tattooed rose. The promise was that we would find each other again. We found each other. So why does the mark still bleed? "That is because," Emily said slowly, "finding each other wasn't enough. The promise was to stay together, and we haven't stayed together yet." Richard intertwined his fingers with hers. "Then, let's stay together." But Emily hesitated. "Do you know what will happen if this gets out? A millionaire with his housekeeper. The media will destroy you. Your businesses will suffer. Your reputation. To hell with my reputation. And my daughter. Lily will grow up being pointed at as the daughter of the housekeeper who seduced the boss. Emily, I don't care what people will say." "But I do care," she replied, her voice firm. "Because I've lived this before. In another life. I was the daughter of a landowner who fell in love with a worker, and it destroyed us. Diego was killed. I died of heartbreak. And our promise has been bleeding for 203 years. Tears streamed down again. I can't make Lily pay for this. I can't risk everything on a feeling that might just be memory, and just trauma from another life. This isn't just memory, Richard said, holding her face. You know this. What you feel when you look at me isn't history. It's the present. Emily closed her eyes. More tears fell. I know. But I'm afraid. Of what? Of repeating it. Of losing you again. Of the promise never being fulfilled because the world keeps separating us. Richard rested his forehead against hers. Then we won't let the world separate us. Not this time. How? I don't know yet. But we'll find a way. And while they stood there, holding each other in that brownstone library filled with ghosts and ancient promises, neither of them noticed. The tattoo had stopped pulsing. The red was still there. Alive. Intense. But it no longer burned. Because for the first time in 203 years, the promise had taken a step forward. They had found each other. But that was the easy part. The hard part was staying together in a world that still judged them for their social differences. And what happened in the next few days would test that promise in brutal ways, because the past doesn't stay buried easily. And sometimes, ghosts from 200 years ago come back to collect, in ways you'd never imagine. Some people are going to pause here, process the impossible that they've just heard, reflect on their own inexplicable connections. And that's okay, because what comes next is even more impossible. Richard asked Emily to stay at the brownstone that night, not as a housekeeper, as he didn't even know how to define it. A guest? A friend? A reincarnated soulmate? Emily hesitated. She needed to pick up Lily from her grandmother's house. She needed to explain. What exactly? That she had found the man who marked her 203 years ago. I'll take you, Richard offered. And we'll bring your daughter and your grandmother here. Emily looked around the library, at the $50 million brownstone, at the man in the $3,000 suit. Richard, this is insane. Maybe. But what part of our story isn't? He was right. And Emily was tired of fighting something that her soul recognized as truth. So she accepted. An hour later, Richard's helicopter landed on a soccer field near Queens. The pilot nearly had a heart attack when Richard asked to land in a working-class neighborhood. But he obeyed. The neighborhood kids ran over to see. They had never seen a helicopter up close. Emily led Richard to her grandmother's house, a simple two-bedroom apartment, linoleum floors, walls slightly cracked. The contrast with the Brooklyn Heights brownstone was stark, but when they entered and Eleanor saw Richard, something strange happened. The 85-year-old woman didn't seem surprised. She simply looked at him, then at Emily's wrist, and then she smiled. Finally, she said, 203 years, and you finally came to find her. Richard froze. How do you know? Eleanor got up from her rocking chair. Because women in my lineage are born knowing. My great-grandmother told me. She was the granddaughter of Maria Dolores. Not directly, because Maria died unmarried. But Maria had a sister, and the story was passed down generation by generation. The woman marked by the love that killed her, and the promise that one day he would return. The room was silent. Even 3-year-old Lily had stopped playing and was looking. Curious. You knew. Emily whispered to her grandmother. You always knew. I knew you were special. That the mark wasn't an accident. And that when the right man appeared, you would know. Eleanor walked to Richard. Despite her age, there was strength in those eyes. But I also know that in 1820, you didn't have a choice. The world separated you and killed you for it. She touched Richard's chest. In this life, you have a choice. Don't waste it. Lily ran to Emily. Mommy, who is he? Emily looked at Richard. How to explain it to a 3-year-old? But it was Richard who knelt down, got to the little girl's eye level. "My name is Richard," he said softly. "I'm your mother's friend. And if she lets me, I'd like to be your friend too." Lily looked at him with that brutal honesty of children. "Are you rich?" Richard blinked, surprised. "I am." "Then why are you in our house?" "Because," Richard looked at Emily. "Sometimes the most valuable things aren't in rich places." Lily thought for a second. Then she extended her little hand. "Do you want to see my room?" And so, without ceremony, a 3-year-old did what took 203 years. She accepted, without judging, without questioning. Richard spent the night in that humble apartment in Queens, slept on a mattress on the living room floor, ate bean soup that Eleanor made, played dolls with Lily, and for the first time in 38 years, he slept without nightmares. When he woke up the next morning, he found Emily in the small kitchen, making coffee. She was barefoot, her hair loose, no uniform, just an old t-shirt and sweatpants. And Richard thought he had never seen anyone so beautiful. "Good morning," she said shyly. "Good morning." There was silence, comfortable, as if they had done this 1,000 times. Emily poured the coffee. They sat at the small Formica table. "What do we do now?" she asked. "I don't know," Richard admitted. "I never had a manual for dealing with reincarnation and 200-year-old promises." Emily laughed. It was a light sound. "Beautiful." "Me neither." Richard took her hand over the table, traced his thumb over the tattoo. It didn't burn. It was warm. Present. But it didn't hurt. "I think we start slow," he said. "We get to know each other in this life, not just through memories." Emily nodded. "And your daughter? How are you going to explain it to her? The truth, simplified, that I found someone special, and that I want to get to know her better, and society, the media. We'll deal with it when it comes. But Emily, I'm not going to hide you, or our connection." Emily bit her lip. "What if this goes wrong? What if the memories are just trauma? What if we don't work out in this life?" "Then at least we tried," Richard replied, "and the promise was kept. We found each other. We had the chance that Diego and Maria never did." A tear rolled down Emily's cheek. "I'm so afraid." "Me too. But you'll try?" "Yes." And they sealed it with a kiss. Soft, promising, full of hope. The next few days were surreal. Richard went back to the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. Emily to her routine of 3 jobs. But they talked every day. Texts, calls. He started picking her up from work, taking Lily out for walks. And people started to notice. The media hadn't yet, but the staff at the brownstone had. The neighborhood in Queens too. Gossip started. The housekeeper seducing the boss, the millionaire having a midlife crisis. But Richard and Emily tried to ignore it, until it happened. A week after that day in the library, Richard was at the brownstone when he got a call. It was from the hospital. "Mr. Thornton, we have a patient here. Emily Reyes. She gave your name as her emergency contact." Richard's world stopped. "What happened?" "She was in an accident, hit by a car. She's in surgery now. It's serious." Richard doesn't remember hanging up, doesn't remember running to the car, doesn't remember the drive to the hospital. He only remembers walking into the waiting room and seeing Eleanor holding Lily. The little girl was crying. "Mommy's hurt," she sobbed. Richard fell to his knees in front of them. "What happened?" Eleanor, with tears in her old eyes, explained. She was crossing the street coming back from the grocery store, a car speeding. She didn't have time to get out of the way. They took her into surgery. Internal bleeding, a skull fracture. The words echoed in Richard's mind like a sentence. Hemorrhage. Skull. Serious. No. No. Not again. Not 203 years later. He couldn't lose her again. Richard stayed in that waiting room for 6 hours, holding Lily, praying to gods he didn't believe in, making promises he didn't know how he could keep. And during those 6 eternal hours, the memories came back, stronger, more vivid. He saw 1820, saw the moment the guards broke down the door of the small room where he was with Maria, saw the horror on her face, saw her being dragged away, saw the summary trial, the conviction, the cold cell, saw the last thought before the rope tightened around his neck, "I will find you, in every life," and saw, from somewhere beyond, Maria locked in her chambers, wasting away, dying from the inside out, and the promise she made in her last breath, "This mark will bleed until it finds you again." The promise was kept. They found each other, but what if it was too late? What if fate was cruel enough to reunite them only to tear them apart again? Finally, a doctor came out. "Family of Emily Reyes." Richard stood up. "Eleanor too." "How is she?" The doctor hesitated. "The surgery was successful, sir. We stopped the bleeding. But she suffered severe head trauma. She's in a medically induced coma. We don't know when she'll wake up or if she'll wake up." The words were a knife. "Can I see her?" "You can, but she won't respond." Richard entered the ICU. Emily was connected to machines, tubes, monitors, her face pale, almost lifeless. And on her left wrist, exposed because of the medical equipment, the tattoo, the rose with 7 thorns. But something was different. Richard approached. The red was fading. Not completely. But the edges of the rose were turning pink, as if the ink were dissolving. A nurse came in. "Excuse me, sir, but are you family?" "I am," Richard lied. "I'm her fiancé." The word came out naturally, as if it had always been true. The nurse checked the machines, noted something on the clipboard. "It's a fight," he said softly. "But she's strong. Her vitals are stable." After he left, Richard took Emily's hand, the one with the tattoo, and rested his forehead on hers. "No," he whispered. "Not this time. You're not going to die again. I won't lose you again." He touched the tattoo, ran his fingers over the rose, and then something impossible happened. The tattoo glowed. Not metaphorically. It literally emitted a faint red light. And Richard felt it. A pull. As if he were being sucked into the mark. He tried to let go of Emily's hand, but he couldn't. His fingers were stuck to her skin. The red light grew brighter. And then Richard saw. Flash. But not like before. This time it was more than memory. It was presence. He was in 1820, not seeing, living. Diego was in the small room preparing paints and heard the door open. Maria entered, tears streaming down her face. "They found us," she said. "My father knows." Diego dropped everything, ran to her. "Then we flee. Now. Tonight." But Maria shook her head. "He's placed guards at every exit and said if I try to escape, he'll kill you and your family." Diego had no family. He was an orphan, but she didn't know. "Then what do we do?" Maria held his hands, her eyes desperate. "Mark me. Now. Something that will never come off. So that even if they force me to marry, even if they separate us, I'll always carry you with me." Diego hesitated. "Maria, if they see it, they won't. I'll hide it. But please, I need this. I need to know I was yours, even if only for a little while." So Diego did. Prepared the reddest ink, took the finest needles, and tattooed the rose on her wrist. 7 thorns, he explained. 1 for each month we've had. Maria cried during the entire process, not from pain, from despair. When he finished, she looked at the mark. "Promise," she begged. "Promise that even if they separate us, you'll look for me. In this life or the next." Diego kissed the still bleeding tattoo. "I promise I'll find you, no matter how long it takes." Maria rested her forehead on his. "And I promise that this rose will bleed until we find each other again." They kissed. For the last time. The next day, Diego was captured. 2 days later, hanged. And as the rope tightened around his neck, as life drained away, Diego's last thought was, "I'm coming back, I promise." Richard returned to the present with a scream. He was on the floor of the ICU, gasping, sweating, crying. And he understood. The tattoo wasn't just a mark. It was a portal, a connection between lives, between souls. And as long as Emily was alive, as long as the tattoo existed, the promise continued. He stood up, returned to her bed, took her hand again. And this time, he didn't just touch the tattoo. He spoke to her soul. "Maria, Emily, whoever you are now, I need you to come back. For 203 years, I've been searching for you. 203 years, this promise has waited. We've met, finally. And I am not letting you go again." His tears fell onto her hand. "If you're listening to me, wherever your soul is now, please, come back to me." Silence. Only the sound of the machines. But then, very slowly, one of Emily's fingers twitched. Richard froze. He stared at her hand. Another finger moved, and then her whole hand squeezed his, weakly, but intentionally. His eyes darted to the heart monitor. Her heartbeat had increased. Slightly, but visibly. "Emily," he called. "Can you hear me?" Nothing, but her hand still held his. And the tattoo. The tattoo had returned to a vibrant red, as if it had been recharged. Richard slammed the emergency button. Nurses rushed in. "She moved," Richard said, his voice desperate. "She squeezed my hand." A doctor entered, checked her vitals, tested her reflexes. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside while we examine her." Richard hesitated. He didn't want to let go of her hand, but a nurse gently guided him out. In the waiting room, Eleanor held a sleeping Lily. When she saw Richard's face, and she knew. "She's back? She's coming back," Richard confirmed. "She moved," she responded. Eleanor closed her eyes. Tears streamed down her face. "The promise is strong." 20 minutes later, the doctor came out. "Mr. Thornton, the patient is responding to stimuli. She's not awake yet, but her neurological signs have improved significantly. When will she wake up? We don't know. But now, we have hope." And Richard realized. The tattoo knew. When Emily was in danger of dying, it started to fade, as if the promise was dissolving. But when he touched her, when he called to her, the promise responded and brought her back. Because 203 years ago, Diego and Maria promised to find each other, and promises written on skin, sealed with blood, traverse lifetimes. If you didn't get goosebumps now, comment goosebumps, because what happened when Emily finally woke up is even more impossible to believe. For 3 days, Richard stayed in that hospital, sleeping in a chair, holding Emily's hand, talking to her, telling her about Lily, about Eleanor, about the plans he had, the places he wanted to take her. And on the 3rd day, at dawn, she opened her eyes. Richard was asleep, his head resting on the bed, his hand still intertwined with hers. And when Emily looked at him, the first thing she saw was the tattoo, the red rose, 7 thorns. But something was different. One of the thorns had vanished. not faded. Vanished completely, as if it had never existed. Emily touched the mark with her free hand, counted mentally. 6 thorns were, not 7. "Richard," she called, her voice hoarse from 3 days of disuse. He woke up with a start. "Emily!" He stood up, pressed the call button, returned to her. "How are you feeling? Are you in pain? Do you need anything?" But Emily could only stare at her wrist. "The tattoo changed," she whispered. Richard looked down and froze. She was right. 6 thorns, not 7. "How?" A doctor rushed in, nurses behind him. "Size, Ms. Reyes, we're so glad you're awake. How do you feel?" "Confused," Emily replied honestly. "They ran tests, examinations, light physical therapy." "A miracle," the doctor said 3 hours later. "You shouldn't be conscious, let alone responding this well. It's inexplicable." After everyone left, Richard locked the ICU door. "We need to talk about this," he said, pointing to the tattoo. Emily nodded. 7 thorns. 1 for each month Diego and Maria had together. But now there are 6. What does that mean? Richard thought. Maybe, each time we fulfill part of the promise, a thorn disappears. Emily frowned. What part did we fulfill? We met. We recognized each other. And I brought you back. Brought me back? Richard recounted. The vision. The portal. The activated promise. When you were dying, the tattoo started to fade. But when I touched you and called to you, it glowed, and you came back. Emily touched the mark. So the promise is fulfilling itself, little by little. It seems that way. And when all the thorns are gone, silence. Neither of them knew the answer. But they both felt it. When the last thorn disappeared, the promise would be completely fulfilled. And then, they would finally be free. Or finally together forever. Or maybe both. Emily stayed in the hospital for 3 more days, recovering too quickly, according to the doctors. Inexplicable, they repeated. But Richard and Emily knew the truth. The promise had brought her back, and now, with 6 thorns instead of 7, something had changed. The tattoo no longer burned. It didn't throb. It was there, present, but peaceful, as if it had fulfilled part of what it should. On the night before her release, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept staring at the tattoo, counting the thorns repeatedly. 6. Always 6. Richard was in a chair next to the bed, also awake. What are you thinking about? He asked. About 1820, Emily replied. Maria was 7 months along with Diego. 7 thorns, 1 for each month. Yeah, and now there are 6. Because we fulfilled something. Because I brought you back. The promise worked. Emily looked at him. But there are still 6 thorns left. 6 stages of the promise. Richard sat on the edge of the bed. Maybe each thorn represents a barrier that Diego and Maria couldn't overcome, and we need to overcome them all to fulfill it completely. What barriers? Emily thought. The first one was finding each other. Diego and Maria were separated before that. We found each other. First thorn disappeared. Makes sense. So the next 6 are, I don't know, but we'll find out. And they found out sooner than they expected. 2 days after Emily was discharged, the news broke. Someone took a photo of Richard in the hospital, holding Emily's hand, posted it on social media, identified him. Richard Thornton, real estate magnate, 38 years old, single, fortune of $470 million. In the ICU with an unidentified woman. The speculations began. Girlfriend, sister, lover, and then someone found out. A nurse sold the information to a gossip website. The woman was Emily Reyes, 29 years old, former maid at the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, single mother, resident of Queens. The explosion was immediate. Magnate Richard Thornton in romance with former maid. Millionaire abandons elite for cleaning lady. Scandal. Thornton visiting maid in Queens. The headlines were brutal. The comments, worse. She just wants the money. He's having a midlife crisis on poor Lily. She's going to grow up being pointed at. He'll be tired of it in 3 months. Just watch. Richard tried to get things under control. He sued a couple of websites, issued a statement pleading for privacy. But the media, it just wouldn't stop. And Emily saw it all. She read everything, each cruel comment, each malicious speculation, and she started to doubt. Maybe they're right, she told Eleanor one night. Maybe it's all just a fantasy. Reincarnation, promises, magical tattoos. Maybe I'm just using it as an excuse. Excuse for what? Eleanor asked. To justify that I've fallen for a man who's completely out of my reach. Eleanor held her granddaughter's hands. You're scared. I'm terrified. Of what, honey? Of repeating 1820. Of losing him. Of society destroying us. Again, Eleanor pointed to the tattoo. How many thorns are there? 6. There were 7 when it started. Something's changed. The promise is being fulfilled. Are you going to let the fear of people you don't even know destroy this? But what if it goes wrong? What if it goes right? Emily had no answer. Meanwhile, Richard was facing his own battle. His partners called an emergency meeting. 12 men in $5,000 suits, sitting around a mahogany table. Richard, we need to talk about this. Scandal, one of them started. It's not a scandal. It's my personal life, which is affecting business. We've lost 3 contracts this week. Clients don't want to be associated with someone who is, as they put it, having a breakdown. Richard slammed his hands on the table. Breakdown? I'm with someone I love. Is that a breakdown? You've known her for 2 weeks, Richard. She used to clean your house. Do you understand how this looks? I don't care how it looks. You should, because your shareholders care. The board cares. And if you continue like this, we'll have to consider temporarily removing you. Richard stood up. Then remove me, because I'm not ending this. The partners exchanged glances. Richard, be reasonable. You're throwing away everything you've built for a woman who... Be careful what you say, Richard interrupted, his voice dangerous. The partner swallowed hard. We're trying to help you, to protect you, to protect the company. I know, Richard said, calmer now. But understand, this isn't a whim. This is deeper than you can imagine. He left the meeting, pulled out his cell phone, called Emily. We need to talk. They met in that same library where it all started, where Emily had found the diary, where the promise had revealed itself. Richard told her about the meeting, about the threat of being removed. Emily told him about the comments, about the fear. And then they fell silent. Maybe, Emily said slowly, maybe it's better to stop, before it gets worse. Richard looked at her as if he'd been punched. Are you saying that maybe the promise isn't about us being together in this life? Maybe it's just about us meeting, recognizing each other, and then moving on. Moving on? Separately? Yes. Richard shook his head. No. I won't accept that. Richard, look around us. The whole world is against us. Your empire is at risk. My daughter is being bullied at school. Eleanor is getting threatening calls. This isn't sustainable. Then we change. We leave the country. We start over. And I leave Lily without school, without friends, without stability. I can give all that to her, to you. I don't want your money, Richard. I never did. I know. But maybe it's not enough. Maybe love doesn't conquer all. Maybe 1820 taught us that some battles can't be won. Richard felt tears in his eyes. Do you believe that? Emily touched the tattoo. I don't know what I believe anymore. And then it happened. The tattoo glowed, not like at the hospital. Different, weaker, but definitive. They both stared and saw the second thorn disappear, in real time, as if it were being erased by an invisible eraser. 5 thorns remained. What? Emily whispered. Richard understood first. We faced the second barrier, the social pressure, the doubt, and even so. We're still here, still trying. But I just said that maybe we should stop. But you didn't stop, and you're here, talking, bunny fighting. Emily looked at the mark. So, every time we overcome a barrier that Diego and Maria couldn't, a thorn disappears. It seems that way. But that means that there are still 5 barriers left, 5 obstacles that could destroy us, or 5 opportunities to prove that this time we're stronger. This story shouldn't exist, it shouldn't be possible, but it needs to be told, because some promises are bigger than life, bigger than death, bigger than time. In the next 3 months, Richard and Emily faced all 5 remaining barriers. The third barrier was Richard's family. His parents, 4th-generation aristocrats, threatened to disinherit him. They said he was tarnishing the family name. Richard faced them, said he chose Emily, that he chose the promise. The parents cut ties. That night, the third thorn disappeared. 4 remained. The 4th barrier was Lily. The girl started having nightmares. She dreamed of men dying by hanging, of women crying, memories that weren't hers. Emily panicked. My daughter is being affected by the promise. She's carrying traumas from 1820. But Eleanor explained, they're not traumas. It's protection. Souls recognize each other. Lily is remembering to make sure you don't repeat the mistakes. And when Lily woke up one day and said, Mommy, don't let him go away. I remember you were very sad when he left before. Emily and Richard hugged, cried, and the 4th thorn disappeared. 3 remained. The 5th barrier came from where they least expected it. Eleanor got sick. Advanced cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months. She called Richard and Emily, held their hands. Are you going to stay together? And she asked, her voice weak. We will, Richard promised. Even when I'm no longer here to remember the story. Especially then, Emily replied. Because we'll pass it on to Lily, and she'll pass it on to her children. The promise continues. Eleanor smiled, closed her eyes, and died in peace the next morning. The 5th thorn had disappeared. 2 remained. The 6th barrier was forgiveness, Emily discovered, through old documents, that her family was descended from the man who had denounced Diego and Maria in 1820, the servant who betrayed them. For weeks, she carried that guilt, as if she were personally responsible, until Richard held her face and said, we are not our ancestors. We don't carry their sins. We make our own choices. And when Emily finally forgave herself, when she accepted that the past didn't define the present, the 6th thorn vanished. 1 remained. And they reached the 7th and final barrier. The eternal commitment. Richard brought Emily back to the library, the one where it all began. And there, surrounded by ancient books and forgotten stories, he knelt. He pulled a box from his pocket. Inside, a ring, not a diamond, a red ruby, the color of the tattoo. Emily, I don't know if I believe in fate. I don't know if reincarnation is real, or if we're just plain crazy. But I know one thing for sure. I love you, in this life, in the last, and in everyone to come. Tears streamed down Emily's face. Diego promised to find Maria. I fulfilled that promise. Now, I promise to stay. Forever. No matter how many lifetimes it takes. He held out the ring. Will you marry me? Emily looked at the tattoo. One thorn remained, red, alive, waiting. She looked at Richard, at the man who had crossed 203 years to keep a promise, and she answered, yes. The moment the ring touched her finger, the tattoo glowed, an intense red light, stronger than all the other times, and the last thorn disappeared. The rose remained. Red. Perfect. But without thorns. The promise had been kept. 203 years, 7 barriers, a promise that crossed death. And finally, in that library, with a ruby ring and a tattoo without thorns, Diego and Maria, now Richard and Emily's, were together, forever. They got married 3 months later, not in a church, but on the land where the San Jeronimo Hacienda had once stood, exactly where Diego had been executed 203 years before, and where Maria had sworn that the rose would bleed until they met again. Lily was the flower girl. She wore a dress with red roses embroidered on it, and when Richard and Emily kissed, sealing their vows, something extraordinary happened. Emily's tattoo glowed one last time, and then it began to fade, not disappear, but lighten from an intense red to a soft pink, permanent, beautiful, but no longer bleeding, because the promise had been kept, and promises fulfilled no longer need to burn. Have you ever felt like you knew someone you just met? Have you ever had an inexplicable connection? That defies all logic. Maybe it's not coincidence, and maybe it's not imagination. Maybe it's a promise from another life, written on your soul, waiting to be fulfilled. Richard and Emily live today in the brownstone that was built on the grounds of the San Jeronimo Hacienda. Lily has a little brother, a 2-year-old boy, and when he was born, the doctors discovered something impossible. He had a birthmark on his left wrist, small, subtle, but unmistakable. A rose, without thorns, light pink, as if the promise had passed to the next generation, not as a burden, but as a reminder that true love doesn't die. It's simply reborn, time and time again, until it is fulfilled. And when you look at Emily's tattoo today, it's just a beautiful pink rose. No one looking at it would know the story. The blood, the death, the 203-year-old promise. But she knows, Richard knows, and now, you know. Some marks on our skin aren't accidents. They're maps, guides, promises written in past lives, waiting for us to find them, to recognize them, and to fulfill them. What story of connection have you never told? Have you ever felt like you knew someone? Have you ever had an inexplicable mark? Tell us in the comments, because maybe, just maybe, you're also fulfilling an ancient promise, and this rose, that bled for 203 years, finally rests, not because the love ended, but because it was finally fulfilled, the end.